All right, the sermon series is called The Ten Commandments. Ancient ethics, modern life. We're looking at these very old standards, ethics, principles, rules that God gave to the nation of Israel before they went into the promised land to help them establish their nation. And we're looking at how these principles that flowed from the heart of our God still are so relevant for us today in our world. Last week's message was about Sabbath and had a great response from that. If you missed that message, go and watch it on YouTube. And if you watched that message and thought, I need to get some rest, and then you still had a ridiculously busy week and didn't find time for rest, watch it again. And make sure that you don't forget. Do not forget to slow down. This week, we're looking at the fifth commandment. Honor your parents. Honor your parents. Honor your father and mother. It's appropriate. Last night at the Archway thing, Catherine McClellan was the performer, and it was a whole evening honoring her father, Gene McClellan. I thought, how appropriate to have an evening of honoring a father when the very next message is today about honoring your parents. And my dad is here today playing bass, so I got to make sure that I honor him special today. So love you, Father. Glad that you're here, Dad. Now, maybe some of the adults in the room, I guess that's most of us here, isn't it? You might think, well, it's too bad we just dismissed the kids for Discovery Park because this message is for them, right? Well, this commandment is not just for kids. It is for kids and teenagers, but it's a long-standing Hebrew understanding that this command is for children of all ages, including for adult children, and has application in how we care for our aging parents. So if you have a parent or parents that are still alive, this message is for you. And I would say, even if you do not have a parent that's still alive, if you are a parent or a grandparent, this is a message that you might need to hear to teach your children or grandchildren, or even to pick up some thoughts about being a kind of parent that is worthy of honor. So if at some point you thought, good, I don't have to listen to this one, I can do a Homer Simpson and just put the football game on during church and ignore the sermon, I'll kindly ask you to tune back in. This is a message for everyone. So, Exodus chapter 20 is where we are this is when God gave the Ten Commandments to the people of Israel, and we're just going to read verse 12 today, which says, honor your father and mother, then you will live a long, full life in the land the Lord your God is giving you. Here we have the beginning of the shift in the Ten Commandments, from commandments, the first four that are mostly sort of generally related to our relationship with God, and now the other ones, starting here, are more generally related to our interactions with people. And these commandments of, our relationships to people start with the commandment to honor your parents, your father and your mother. These are the first people you encounter in your life. They are the reason for your existence. They are responsible for your upbringing. They are the most important people in laying the foundation for the rest of your life. So it makes sense to put them first on the list of people to whom we have certain ethical responsibilities. It's worth noting as well, as you read this, that both father and mother are treated equally in the commandment. And as you look at all of the different times in the Bible that refer back to this commandment and this concept of honoring your parents, it is pretty consistent that it talks about father and mother equally. So that's interesting. You would think maybe, you might assume that in an ancient world, in a patriarchal culture, that this command might say that you should honor your father and maybe not so much the mother. But no, in keeping with the story of creation in Genesis, which says that man and women are both created equally in the image of God, fathers and mothers are equally to be honored by their children. And we see this, as I said, consistently expressed throughout the Bible. Another thing to note about this commandment is the word honor. The word honor, the very first word. This word comes from a Hebrew root word which means heavy or weighty. To honor someone is to recognize the weightiness of their position. We might say, for example, that the boss at work is really throwing his weight around. Right? You've heard that phrase. Or that King Charles might talk about the weight of the crown. Right? Heavy is the head that wears the crown. And he's not talking about the physical weight, although I understand it's a physically heavy thing too. But it's the weight of the office, the weight of the responsibility. And that's what this is getting at here with this word honor. I can tell you, having 5 children who are quickly growing up before my eyes and becoming more and more complex as human beings, I'm increasingly aware of the weightiness of the task that Julia and I have as mother and father to these kids. Heavy is the head that wears the crown of parenthood. And so the Bible here is telling us that parenthood is a weighty responsibility, and thus it is inherently a position deserving of honor. Children are immeasurably indebted to their parents. The first century Jewish historian named Josephus, who, it's really interesting, you could read Josephus. I mean, if you're like a history nerd and you want to go really deep on first century Jewish world and the world of the New Testament, read Josephus. It's really interesting. But Josephus said that to honor parents ranks second in importance only to the honor we owe God. So God commands his people, honor your father and your mother. Now that's a good rule to follow in life. Good ethic, but why did God give this commandment to the people of Israel as one of their top 10, laws for their society as they're preparing to go into the promised land and set up their new nation? Why is this so important that it's deserving of its position as the 5th commandment of the 10 commandments, that you should honor your parents? Well, I think it's because strong families are a vital part of a successful, stable society. This commandment isn't just about being nice to the people who gave birth to you and changed your diapers and fed you when you were little. No, it's actually about building a healthy, functioning society. In fact, in the ancient world, almost all of the countries around Israel at this time all had very similar laws as countries. Why? Because they all understood that it's through the family that the values, practices, history, traditions, and religious beliefs are passed along from generation to generation. The culture depends on this intergenerational thing. Mark Rooker wrote this. He said, "For a culture to endure, it must be transmitted. And this can only occur between generations when there exists a keen sense of love and respect." This is why cults and totalitarian governments try to pull people away from their families to convince them of their ideologies. It's why they try to pull families apart, because if you can remove someone from their family and cause them to lose respect for their parents and their upbringing, then they can be remolded into whatever warped thing that they want those people to be. I'll have to say, Canada is guilty of this when the government, in partnership with churches, built Indian residential schools, right? We know that story. And they took kids away from their parents. And there was the 60s scoop, and they did it again in the 1960s when they scooped kids off of the reserves and took them away. And they taught these kids at these schools to disrespect their traditions and their cultures, essentially violating this commandment. They said, don't honor your parents, dishonor them. Why did they do this? Because they said, quote, to kill the Indian in the child. That was the goal. And First Nations communities in Canada today are still, generations later, trying to recover from the impact of all of that. The suffering that you see today amongst Indigenous peoples and the poverty issues and the addiction and all these things that we see that largely is a result of this egregious injustice that was done against them that pulled their families apart. So you can see what happens if families are torn apart, if families are not held together. It causes a society to crumble. So strong families are the foundation of a strong society. The Bible talks about in various places how decline in family relations is a characteristic of a failing society. We see this in Micah and Isaiah and in the New Testament as well, in Romans and in 2 Timothy. Paul writes this. He said, "You should know this, Timothy, that in the last days there will be very difficult times." By the way, we're living in the last days, according to the New Testament. "For people will love only themselves and their money. They will be boastful and proud, scoffing at God, disobedient to their parents, and ungrateful. They will consider nothing sacred." Disobedience to parents is one of the signs of a society that is failing. On the flip side, restoration of families is a characteristic of a better future to come, according to the Bible. In Malachi 4, God says, "Look, I'm sending you the prophet Elijah before the great and dreadful day of the Lord arrives. His preaching will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children and the hearts of the children to their fathers." There will be a renewal of this intergenerational love and respect and honor. The fifth commandment will kind of be back into effect. So, you see this idea. Grandparents, parents, we're expected to pass down the beliefs and values that put us on God's path. Christian parents, you specifically have a sacred responsibility to pass the faith on to your children. And children have a sacred responsibility to honor and respect and listen to your parents as they do so. I love this passage, this verse in Jeremiah 6:16. I love this. "Thus says the Lord, stand by the roads and look and ask for the ancient paths where the good way is, and walk in it and find rest for your souls." The ancient paths, the ways that have been passed down from generation to generation. So this commandment, unlike the others, also is unique in that it comes with a promise. So let's go back and reread it again, Exodus 20:12. It's honor your father and mother, and it says, then, here's the promise, then you will live a long, full life in the land the Lord your God is giving you. God promises us a long, full life if we honor our parents. Is this promise an absolute promise, you might think? Is that an absolute promise? And I would say no. This is a promise similar to the Proverbs. When you read the book of Proverbs, it has all these statements that are not always true. There are exceptions, but they are true in general. They are general principles that are usually true. And they are, so they're meant to kind of teach us how to live, but they're not a guarantee. But the idea here is that in general, if you honor your parents, if you obey them, if you listen to them, and if you receive this ancient teaching, the teachings of Christ and so on that have been passed down, then your life is going to go better for you than if you don't. Than if you ignore what your parents say and you disrespect them and you wander off like the prodigal son and you live a reckless life. So you want to live a long and happy life? Well, in general, you need to follow what your parents say and follow the ancient paths. Instead of just saying, the heck with these people, they don't know what's what, and live in your own life. So that's the commandment. That's the commandment. And it raises a bunch of questions, doesn't it? Okay, so honor your father and mother. Now, some of you, maybe you didn't have great parents. So this raises a lot of questions. You might think, well, okay, so what does it actually look like to honor my father and mother? Does that mean obeying them? Does that mean everything they say I have to do? What if they ask me to do stuff that's wrong or illegal or unethical? What if they ask me to disobey God or reject my faith? What if my parents are not honorable people? What about those abusive parents out there? Am I supposed to honor them and obey them even when they're so unworthy of it? So many good questions, and we're not going to satisfactorily answer all of those questions in this sermon. But let me just say a couple of things. Let me first acknowledge that I know many of you had a very difficult childhood. I have heard too many horror stories of abusive mothers and abusive fathers. You didn't deserve that. You deserve better than that. And if any parent ever used this commandment as a weapon against you to be controlling or manipulative or abusive, they were misusing God's word for evil when they did that. I appreciate how in the New Testament especially, parents are reminded that they don't get a free pass to be terrible. In Ephesians 6, for example, I'm going to read that. The Apostle Paul here restates the fifth commandment, but he adds something. So it says, "Children, obey your parents because you belong to the Lord, for this is the right thing to do. Honor your father and mother. This is the first commandment with a promise. If you honor your father and mother, things will go well for you, and you will have a long life on the earth." But then he adds this: "Fathers, parents, do not provoke your children to anger by the way you treat them. Rather, bring them up with the discipline and instruction that comes from the Lord Jesus, who is all about love." Right? So, listen, mom and dad, you've got responsibilities here. You cannot provoke your children to anger or provoke them to wrath. You can't treat them poorly in such a way that they are, living this life that is in disobedience to God because you've put them there in the way you've treated them. Do not provoke your children to wrath. Jesus has even stronger words about this in Matthew chapter 18. Where he says, "If anyone who welcomes a little child like this on my behalf is welcoming me." He's got a little child there with him when he's saying this. "But if you cause one of these little ones, a child, who trusts in me, to fall into sin, it would be better for you to have a large millstone tied around your neck and be drowned in the depths of the sea." He did not mince words. He ain't messing around. You get it. You got to treat kids with respect too. Parents don't just get respect, they have to also treat their kids with respect. And I would add that obviously if your parent asks you to do something that is illegal or unethical or violates your faith, you do not have to obey your parents in that instance, because God's authority is higher than your parents' authority. God's authority is higher than your parents' authority. But does that mean that if your parents were bad parents for one reason or another, that we just then don't have to honor them at all and we can just ignore this commandment? I wouldn't go that far. Every summer when I'm on vacation, I read a book, my vacation book. This summer I read this one, Where the Light Fell by Philip Yancey. It's his memoirs, it's his autobiography. And we have it in our church library, by the way. I checked. And so if you're looking for, if you like to read biographies, this is a really, really well-written biography of Philip Yancey, who is a Christian author who's fairly well-known. And in this story, among the other things that he dealt with that were very challenging in his life, he had a very difficult mother. She was an exceptionally religious person. She taught Bible classes, and to the church world, she was an angel. She was a saint. But at home, she was a very different person. And she treated her two sons terribly. They had a very traumatic childhood. And even into adulthood, she continued to treat them poorly. But one thing that struck me as I read this book is how much Philip Yancey continued to love his mother as an adult and kept on trying with her. He didn't give up on her. He had a lot of grace for his very difficult mother. And it's a beautiful story in that way. And I think there's something to be said there, because I'm quite sure that when Jesus taught us to love people, he didn't mean to only love the people that are easy to love. In fact, he told us even to love our enemies. And he taught us to forgive over and over and over and over again. When Jesus hung on the cross, after being falsely accused, stripped, beaten, mocked, and tortured by people who couldn't care less about him for crimes he didn't commit, he never cursed the people who put him there. In fact, he looked down from the cross at his abusers, and he had compassion in his heart, and he asked God to forgive them, for they know not what they do. And for me, that scene has replayed in my mind many times when I feel like holding a grudge or getting back at someone who has done wrong to me. I just think, if Jesus can hang on the cross and forgive his executioners, I think I ought to be able to forgive the person who's hurt me. And if for you, the person who has hurt you in some way is your mom or your dad, maybe one of the ways that you honor them is by learning to forgive them. Pastor Ron Mell wrote a book on the Ten Commandments. I just took it out from our church library. Where's Janessa? I don't know. Anyway, I can't see her. Anyway, Janessa does such a good job with our library. She puts out books that are relevant to the things I'm preaching on, and so that one caught my eye. I was like, oh, I'm going to take that one. And it's been helpful as I'm preparing. But he writes in his book that he grew up never knowing his father. His dad was absent for all of those moments in his life when you want your dad to be there. But at the urging of his wife, kind of late into adulthood, he reached out and tracked down his father, and they met and they reconciled. And it's a good thing that they did when they did, because 6 months later his dad passed away. And he writes about that. He says, all of us know that when it comes to really loving someone, it isn't because everything they've ever done is worthy of love and affection. They're not perfect. But the last time I checked, none of us are. Okay, so what does it look like to honor your parents? Having said all of that, the book of Proverbs is a good companion to the Ten Commandments. It has a lot of practical wisdom, and a lot of it relates to the Ten Commandments. And in this commandment particularly, as I was leafing through the book of Proverbs, I came across several statements that relate to this idea of honoring your parents. And I think it's just going to give us a little framework we're going to go through this quickly, so rapid fire, okay? What does it look like to honor your parents? Listen and learn from them. Proverbs 1, 8-9. Sorry about my font choice there. My font color kind of blends in, doesn't it? Listen and learn from them. Proverbs 1, 8-9 says, my child, listen when your father corrects you. Don't neglect your mother's instruction. What you learn from them will crown you with grace and be a chain of honor around your neck. I remember when I went off to university for the first year, I went off to St. X, and I went and I learned, and my mind was open to all sorts of things that I hadn't known before, and I came home from my first year of university, and I was pretty sure I now knew more about the world than my siblings and my pastor and both of my parents put together. Yeah, I was an arrogant little jerk. Some of you might think he still is kind of an arrogant little jerk. Not as little as he used to be, though. My pastor actually had to put me in my place, and I'm glad he did. Actually, it was very helpful. It was a wake-up call. Maybe our parents actually have some wisdom and life experience that we need to learn and listen to. And ideally, as our parents share their faith with us, if they're believers, and remind us of the truth, remind us of God's faithfulness, that we need to listen to them and learn from them. It's something easy to lose sight of as a young adult, isn't it? We go off and we start living our life, and our parents, they don't know anything. They're so outdated and old-fashioned. Well, actually, maybe they're not so stupid after all. We need to listen to what they have to say. Even if you don't always agree with them, listen and learn. In this way, you honor your parents. What else? Obey your parents. Obey them. Proverbs 6:20, my son, obey your father's commands and don't neglect your mother's instruction. With the caveat that I gave earlier about, if you had parents that are rotten and telling you to do bad things, whatever. But yes, honoring your parents means obeying them. There ought to be a healthy level of respect towards your parents, such that doing what they say is a natural response. I remember when I first met Julia's father, and I started going to their home, and he kind of intimidated me. He still does a little bit, to be honest. A little bit. Not as much as he used to. But at first, I was really intimidated by her father, and I would go there, and I'm just trying to be good and not make him mad or anything, because I love his daughter. And he has this chair, and that's his chair. And you're allowed to sit in that chair, but if he wants to sit in that chair, you better get out of that chair. That's his chair. And I learned that very quickly. That's his chair. And that's what I'm talking about. Okay, there's a rule. That's his chair. And you got a healthy respect, just as this general, these little kids today that just don't have any respect for their elders. Smarten up. Okay? Respect your elders. Obey them. Don't neglect their commands and their instructions. Speak respectfully to them. Proverbs 30, verse 17. Listen to this. The eye that mocks a father and despises a mother's instructions will be plucked out by ravens of the valley and eaten by vultures. I don't think that's literal, but you get the idea. Don't badmouth your parents. Speak respectfully to them and about them. And lastly, care for them as they age. Proverbs 23:22 says, listen to your father who gave you life, and don't despise your mother when she is old. And in 1 Timothy, the New Testament, take care of any widow who has no one else to care for her, but if she has children or grandchildren, their first responsibility is to show godliness at home and repay their parents by taking care of them. This is something that pleases God. As our parents age, sons and daughters take on new responsibilities to return the care that they received from their parents when they were young. And in 1 Timothy 5:8, he continues, but those who don't care for their relatives, especially those in their own household, have denied the true faith. Such people are worse than unbelievers. He has strong words about this. This is a really important, we don't talk a lot about this in sermons, but there are very strong words in the Bible about this. God takes this seriously. And Jesus modeled this for us when he ensures that his mother Mary is cared for before he dies. So there's a few ideas from Proverbs and other scriptures that help us kind of understand a little bit what does it look like to honor our parents. Worship team, you can come as we conclude. Here's one last thing that's interesting about this command. Unlike all of the other 10 commandments, this one has an expiration date. Someday, your mom and dad won't be around anymore. If your parents are still alive, now is the time to honor them. Our relationships with our parents changes as we get older. No offense to my dad, but the shine kind of wears off a little bit, right? As you get older, you think when you're a kid, you think they're a superhero. And then you start to go, oh no, they're just a regular person, right? They're not perfect. But if you're thankful for your parents, if you love them, show it, say it, cultivate it, guard it, and pass it on to the next generation. This is the foundation for a long and full life, and one of the key ingredients in building a functioning, healthy society, world, and community that works the way God designed our world to work. Honor your father and your mother. We're going to close with a song called The Blessing. I think it's a good way to wrap up any church service. It's just a blessing as we go, but also really appropriate for this message because it talks about God's blessing from generation to generation. And that is largely the responsibility of parents to pass that blessing on, to pass on the truth from generation to generation. Let's sing this as we close today.
Why don't you stand and join us?